He stood there, hand in hand with her, while I stood frozen. My boyfriend, no, ex-boyfriend, looked me dead in the eyes and said it like a punch to the gut. "You're not enough for the life I want." Then he turned away and walked off with her, my so-called best friend. My blood ran cold as they disappeared down the hallway of that lavish hotel. The one he used to say reminded him of us. My name echoed behind them, forgotten in that marble corridor like I was just another piece of furniture in his polished world. That was the last moment of my first life. And somehow, it was the first of my second. Because when my eyes opened again, I was there. Back in that same hallway. My heels aching. My throat tight. The smell of his cologne still lingering in the air. Only this time, I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't chase after them. I just watched. Because I remembered everything. The betrayal. The manipulation. The humiliation. The nights I cried myself to sleep while they laughed behind my back. The truth I was too blind to see. The accident that ended it all, me in a hospital bed, too numb to move, too broken to care. And now I was here. Back to the moment he chose her over me. This time I wasn't going to beg for his love. This time I was going to burn his entire world down. I stood straighter, adjusted my necklace, and stepped forward like nothing had changed. Because in his eyes, nothing had. In his eyes, I was still the naive, dependable girlfriend who would wait patiently while he played his little games. I smiled, just barely. Let him think that. It would make everything more satisfying later. The days that followed were surreal. I remembered every conversation before it happened. Every fake apology, every hidden agenda, every sly smirk my friend would make behind my back. They thought they were in control. They thought they were clever. I played along. At dinner, when he tested my patience with friendly comments about how my style was too plain, I giggled and pretended to agree. I let him order for me. I let her whisper fake compliments into my ear. I nodded. Smiled. Laughed on cue. And all the while, I was setting my pieces in place. In my first life, I had spent so much time chasing their approval that I never noticed the quiet power sitting just beyond my reach. Alexander Voss. Cold. Calculated. Brilliant. The man my ex-boyfriend was constantly trying to impress. The man who owned the kind of empire my ex would kill to be part of. In my first life, I was too scared to even speak to Alexander. I had admired him from afar, powerful, controlled, always dressed in black like he stepped out of another world. But now? Now I wasn't scared. Now, I had nothing to lose. I didn't reach out right away. That would be too obvious. No, first, I needed to make myself invisible to my ex's manipulations. I started distancing myself just enough to be noticed, but not enough to be alarming. I skipped a date here, forgot a dinner there. I started dressing the way I wanted, sleek, structured, bold. The first time he commented on it, he tried to frame it as a compliment. "You're finally putting some effort in," he said, not looking up from his phone. I just smiled. The more I pulled back, the more agitated he became. And the more agitated he became, the more her mask started to slip. My rival. My former best friend wasn't used to being second. And with me no longer competing for his attention, she was losing her grip. She started getting possessive. Loud. Insecure. And he hated that. I didn't even have to lift a finger. They were unraveling all on their own. But that wasn't enough. I didn't want to just leave. I wanted them to understand exactly what they lost. So I began maneuvering myself closer to the one man he couldn't afford to alienate, Alexander. It started with a fundraiser event, one I had skipped in my first life. This time I made sure I attended. Alone. Dressed in crimson. I remembered where Alexander would stand. What drink he would be holding. Who he would be talking to. And I made sure I passed him just as he turned. He noticed me. Of course he did. "You're not with anyone?" he asked, his voice low, almost disinterested, but not quite. "Not anymore," I said. He looked at me for a long moment, his gaze assessing. Smart. That was all. But it was a start. By the end of that night, he had asked me 2 questions, remembered my name, and made a comment about the board I had designed for my company. A board he never noticed in my last life. Because in my last life, I hid behind someone else's spotlight. Not anymore. Back at home, my ex was waiting for me, scowling. He said I embarrassed him. That I had no business speaking to men like Alexander. That I needed to remember my place. I smiled sweetly. Of course. But deep inside, I knew exactly where my place would be, at the top. Next to the man he feared most. And that's where I was headed. This time, I wouldn't be the girl left crying in a hallway. This time, I would be the storm they never saw coming. They thought I was folding. That I was quietly accepting my place as the background character in their romance drama. But I wasn't folding. I was loading the gun. For the next 2 weeks, I perfected the role of the loyal girlfriend with just enough distance to make him curious again. He didn't like that I wasn't at his beck and call. He didn't like that I stopped clinging to his every word. And he especially didn't like that I had started attracting attention, his attention. Alexander. I knew my ex was trying to impress him. Always had been. In my first life, every late night, every event, every business pitch. It had all been about getting into Alexander's orbit. He wanted his mentorship. His investment. His approval. And now, he was watching helplessly as I casually stepped into that exact orbit like it belonged to me. Which, in time, it would. I ran into Alexander again at a gallery opening. He remembered me. Not just my name, he remembered my favorite piece from the last exhibit. I didn't need to flirt. I just stood next to him, commented on the artwork, and let my intelligence speak for itself. He liked sharp minds. Not loud ones. Not desperate ones. He liked control. Strategy. I wasn't trying to seduce him. I was letting him notice me. And he did. Meanwhile, at home, the cracks between my ex and my former best friend were spreading like rot. She was jealous, which was ironic considering she won. She'd whisper to me, try to provoke me. Comment on how close I seemed to be getting to Alexander. Laugh in that fake way she always did. I let her. Every time she tried to assert her place, I gave her a little smile that said, go ahead, enjoy your prize. It drove her insane. At a dinner party, she cornered me near the bar, drink in hand, lips tight. You think you're clever, don't you? I tilted my head. What do you mean? You're playing some kind of game. I'm not playing anything, I said softly, turning to walk away. You're not better than me, she hissed. You never were. I paused, just long enough to make her question everything. Then I walked away, unbothered, unreadable, and completely in control. The more she unraveled, the more desperate my ex became to keep the illusion alive. He started showing me affection again. Subtle things at first, bringing me coffee, making inside jokes, reminding me of old memories. I let him think it was working. I let him get comfortable. Because the real strike hadn't even landed yet. When Alexander sent an invitation to a private charity event at his penthouse, I knew it was time to escalate. It wasn't public. It wasn't flashy. It was meaningful. And it wasn't the kind of event just anyone was invited to. I didn't tell my ex. I said I had dinner plans with old friends. Wore a sleek black dress with a sharp neckline and blood-red lips. Arrived right on time. And when Alexander saw me walk in, he gave a small nod. Didn't expect you to show. You invited me, I said with a small smile. He poured me a drink himself. I made sure he saw the way I scanned the room, evaluated the competition. I wasn't here to flirt. I was here to prove I belonged. He liked that. We spoke about market shifts. About a biotech firm my ex had been trying to pitch to Alexander for months. I mentioned something my ex had said, a careless detail he let slip to me in our first life. Alexander stilled. Then asked me to elaborate. So I did. By the end of the night, he had asked for my number, not as a date. As an equal. Someone worth calling. When I got home that night, my ex was already fuming. He tried to play it cool, but I saw the clenched jaw, the too tight smile. Your dinner ran late, he said. We got caught up talking. With who? Just an old friend. I didn't explain. I didn't offer details. I simply walked past him, removed my earrings, and said, you didn't wait up for me, did you? He didn't know whether to be angry or worried. And that's exactly where I wanted him. Because now, for the first time, I had the upper hand. Not through games. Not through drama. Through silence. Through precision. Through being exactly the kind of woman he never deserved, and now couldn't understand. The next morning, Alexander messaged me. You were right about that firm. Let's talk more. I smiled at the screen. Let them think I was still the sweet, quiet girl who forgave too easily and cried in secret. Let them think I was still chasing love. They wouldn't realize I had stopped chasing. Now I was building. Building a future. A new life. A connection with a man who actually saw me. A bond with someone whose power eclipsed every ambition my ex ever had. I wasn't trying to make them jealous. I was replacing them. Piece by piece. And when it all came crumbling down, I'd make sure they understood one thing. It was all their fault. Alexander Voss wasn't a man who wasted time. So when he asked to talk more, he didn't mean over casual coffee or friendly texts. He sent a car. Booked a private room in an upscale restaurant that overlooked the city. Not to impress me, but to test me. I knew that. In my first life, I had watched people try to win his favor with flattery and charm. None of them lasted. He wanted results. Control. Leverage. And I came prepared. I arrived on time, in a midnight blue dress that hit the line between powerful and elegant. No cleavage, no sparkle. Just confidence. When he looked up from his glass and saw me, there was no smile. Just a small nod of approval. That was more than enough. He got straight to the point. What exactly did your ex say about the merger? He was bragging. Talking like he already had your support. He said you were ready to bite if the numbers looked pretty enough. Alexander didn't react. And what do you think? He asked. I think the numbers are dressed in makeup, and you don't like illusions. A flicker of something passed through his eyes. That was my confirmation, he was being played. I leaned forward, calm, deliberate. He's trying to sell you a version of the company that only exists on paper. Their burn rate is triple what he claims. And he's still hiding a second investor who's pushing him to inflate projections. How do you know that? I smiled slightly. Because I used to be invisible in the room. People forget the quiet girlfriend hears everything. He didn't say much after that. But his silence wasn't cold, it was thoughtful. Calculating. Like he was re-evaluating the entire game board. By dessert, he asked for my opinion on 2 upcoming bids. By the time I stepped back into the car, I already knew, I had just become more useful than my ex ever was. The next few days moved quickly. Alexander sent me documents, spreadsheets, questions. I answered them with precision. Not with emotion. Not with excitement. With facts, patterns, leverage. I gave him what no one else would, unfiltered clarity. And slowly, he began to open doors. He invited me to a private networking event, this time as a guest, not a tag-along. Not one person asked who I was with. Because I wasn't there as someone's plus one. I was there with a name, a purpose, and a silent nod from the man at the top. My ex was there too. He didn't expect to see me. Definitely not dressed like that. Definitely not laughing with people he'd spent months trying to impress. When his eyes found me across the room, I didn't look away. I gave him a small, measured smile. And turned back to my conversation with Alexander. He walked up later, of course. Tried to play it cool. Didn't expect to see you here, he said, tone light but eyes sharp. Didn't expect to be invited, I said, matching his tone perfectly. You came with him? I came on my own. But Alexander and I have been talking business. He laughed, a little too loud. You and Alexander? Since when? I tilted my head. Since I realized I was aiming too low. He stared at me, stunned. No words. Just bruised ego radiating off his designer suit. Then he muttered something under his breath and walked off. Let him sulk. Let him wonder. Let him spin in circles trying to figure out how the girl he discarded was suddenly standing shoulder to shoulder with the man he feared most. Back at home, things turned ugly. His girlfriend, the one he left me for, was unraveling. I didn't even have to touch her. Just my presence was enough. The tighter she clung to him, the colder he became. She blamed me. Of course she did. As if I had anything to prove. She called me once. Blocked number. I don't know what you think you're doing, but he's mine. I sipped my tea. Then you should probably keep a closer eye on him. You're pathetic, she spat. Still trying to crawl back into his life. I let her finish her tantrum. Then I said, calm and quiet, I'm not crawling anywhere. I'm rising. If you're threatened, that's your own insecurity. She hung up. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply got back to work. Because while they were busy spiraling, I was moving forward. Building leverage. Earning trust. Quietly getting closer to a man who didn't throw words like enough around just to wound someone. Alexander wasn't easy to read. He didn't flirt. He didn't compliment. But he called. He listened. He gave me tasks, then challenged my perspective. And little by little, I felt it, his attention. The way his eyes lingered longer than before. The way he paused when I spoke, like my voice mattered in a room full of noise. This wasn't about seduction. It was about power recognizing power. One night, after a particularly intense strategy meeting, he walked me to the elevator. Just the two of us. "You're different," he said quietly. "Different from who?" "From what I expected." I looked up at him. People usually see what they want to see. He didn't say anything. But his gaze was unreadable in a way that made my pulse tick faster. The elevator opened. He didn't follow. That was fine. I could wait. After all, I wasn't rushing toward love. I wasn't hoping for redemption. I was hunting legacy. And they were still playing checkers in a game I'd already mastered. He started noticing. Not Alexander. He already had. I mean the man who threw me away like I was replaceable. My ex. The one who told me I wasn't enough and left with the girl who always copied me like her survival depended on it. He started noticing the space I'd carved for myself. The way people started leaning in when I spoke. The way Alexander looked at me with something close to respect, maybe even interest. The shift wasn't loud, it was precise. Quiet power always is. I didn't flaunt it. I didn't need to. At a corporate gala hosted by one of Alexander's venture branches, I arrived alone, not as anyone's date. I wore a crisp white suit that made me look like I'd walked out of a boardroom, and maybe into a war. My ex and his girlfriend were already there, standing too close, laughing too loudly, performing affection like it was theater. When I walked in, they both froze. His girlfriend tugged on his sleeve the moment his eyes locked on mine. "Don't," I imagined her whispering. But it was too late. He couldn't look away. Alexander approached from behind. Calm. Collected. Not smiling, but pleased. "Glad you came," he said. "Of course," I replied smoothly. "Wouldn't miss it." He offered me his arm, not in a romantic gesture, but as a public signal. "This one is mine." I could practically feel my ex's ego splinter. Later that night, while Alexander was across the room speaking with investors, my ex finally worked up the nerve to corner me. We were in the garden terrace, soft music drifting through the glass doors behind us. "You've changed," he said, arms crossed like he didn't like it. "I've grown," I corrected. He shook his head. "You used to be warm. Sweet. You used to care." "You mean I used to care about you," I replied, voice like ice under velvet. "Let me save you the trouble, no, I don't anymore." He exhaled sharply. "So you're just using Voss now? What is this? Revenge?" I tilted my head. "Is that what you think? That I'm using a man like Alexander Voss just to get back at you? You're not that important." That hit him harder than I expected. His jaw clenched, and for a second, I saw the real him, not the polished socialite, not the smiling future CEO. Just a petty, arrogant boy who couldn't stand losing something he thought he owned. "You don't know what you're getting into," he said quietly. "Men like him don't care about you." I smiled. "You're projecting. You didn't care." He had no comeback. As I turned to leave, I added, "Next time you want to warn someone about men like him, maybe try being one worth warning about first." I didn't look back. Alexander was watching when I returned to the main hall. I didn't explain. He didn't ask. But the next morning, I found a new folder in my inbox, confidential company reports. No password. No NDA. Just trust. We were well past casual interest now. This was alliance territory. Meanwhile, my ex was beginning to spiral. Rumors had started. Whispers. Questions about his company's numbers. About his real investor. Someone had been leaking. I wasn't the one pulling the strings, not directly. I didn't need to be. Alexander was too smart to let misinformation slide through unchecked. One quiet conversation from me, one offhand observation about inconsistencies, and his team did the rest. They started digging. The second investor, one my ex had tried to hide in both timelines, was shady. Unlicensed. Aggressive. When Alexander's legal team found out, they began backing out. My ex was too desperate to notice the unraveling. He tried to meet with me again, this time under the guise of clearing the air. I accepted. We met at a rooftop cafe, the same one where he first told me he was tired of playing house with a girl who didn't match his ambition. I remembered every word. I sat in the same seat, only this time, I leaned back with confidence. "You wanted to talk?" I asked. He looked tired. Cornered. Still clinging to charm like it could save him. I made a mistake, he said. I let that hang for a moment. Which one? He flinched. You and I, we had something real. You can't tell me you didn't feel it too. I did, I said softly. That's why it hurt when you threw it away. He nodded, swallowing hard. She's not who I thought she was. No, I said, she's exactly who you knew she was. You just didn't care until the mask slipped. He stared at me. There was guilt in his eyes now. But it wasn't the kind that changes anything. It was the kind that only shows up when consequences appear. She's threatened by you, he admitted. She thinks you're going to ruin everything. I smiled. That's because I am. He blinked. So this is revenge? No, I said, standing. This is me reclaiming everything you said I wasn't worthy of. This is me stepping into a world you never had the strength to enter. I'm not destroying you out of spite. You're destroying yourself trying to keep up. I left him there, stunned, mouth open like he couldn't decide whether to beg or scream. I didn't care. Back at my place, Alexander sent a single message, you were right. They're crumbling. And just like that, I knew I'd passed the final test. He trusted me with information. With power. And soon, if I kept playing the long game, with his legacy. My ex was watching a kingdom slip through his fingers. And I was the one putting the last nail in its coffin. They didn't recognize me anymore. Not the man who discarded me. Not the girl who replaced me. Not even the people who once pitted me. I had shed that skin, that desperate, quiet version of myself who waited for affection and permission and crumbs of validation. Now they stared like they were seeing a stranger in designer heels. And I let them. The charity gala was Alexander's most high-profile event of the year. The guest list read like a who's who of the elite, CEOs, senators, investors, heirs. It was the kind of night my ex used to dream of hosting, back when he thought being charming would open every door. But it wasn't charm that opened doors in Alexander's world. It was precision. Strategy. Loyalty. And I had proven mine. The moment I stepped out of the car, cameras flashed. I wore a backless satin gown in deep emerald, my hair swept up, my expression unreadable. I wasn't his date. But when Alexander walked toward me, suit sharp, expression cool, and extended his hand, the entire crowd noticed. I took it. And just like that, I became the question everyone wanted answered. We entered the gala together. Not speaking, not smiling. Just present. Intentional. Every conversation paused. Every rival calculated. I didn't need to be introduced anymore. I was known. My ex arrived late. I saw him the moment he walked in, face tight, jaw clenched, hand stiff in his girlfriend's grip. She was dressed like she wanted attention. She always did. But no one turned. No one gasped. No one cared. They were all too busy watching Alexander lean in and whisper something in my ear. I didn't laugh. I just nodded, the faintest curve of a smile on my lips. It drove my ex insane. He found me later, near the silent auction tables. Alone for once, drink in hand. Why are you doing this? He demanded, voice low and sharp. What's your angle? I raised a brow. You think I'm doing all this for you? Don't play dumb. You think being on boss's arm makes you untouchable? I don't think, I said coolly. I know. He stepped closer. You're making enemies you can't handle. No, I said. I'm exposing enemies who thought I wouldn't fight back. He scoffed, voice cracking. You were nothing before me. I smiled. Then imagine how terrifying it must be for you that I became this after you. He stared at me, realization dawning like a slow, suffocating choke. He wasn't just losing influence, he was losing the story. The illusion. The narrative he'd built around me being dependent, forgettable, small. And I had shattered it in heels and silence. Back inside, Alexander called for my opinion on a live auction bid. Not for show, genuinely. I walked beside him, whispered my thoughts, and watched the bid double in our favor. He didn't thank me. He didn't have to. Power doesn't need praise. It was his eyes that said it. Later that night, when the gala quieted and the cameras were gone, he offered me a glass of whiskey in the rooftop lounge. Just us, city lights flickering below. You've been careful, he said. Calculated. Impressive. I've had a lot of time to think, I replied. Most people use that time to self-destruct. I used it to learn who my enemies were. He sipped his drink. You're not like them. I know. And you're not like me. I don't want to be. That made him laugh, quiet, genuine. Good. There was silence then. Not awkward. Not charged. Just there. And then, something changed in his eyes. Not lust. Not romance. Something deeper. A shift in how he saw me. Not as a pawn, not as a threat. But as an equal. You understand what happens next, don't you? He said. I nodded. Your competitor's company collapses. The investor scandals leak. And the only person left standing is the one who was always underestimated. He studied me. And you're sure you want to be that person? I didn't hesitate. I am that person. That night, he sent out a formal press release announcing a strategic dissolution of his ties with my ex's company. It was cold. Surgical. The stock dipped within hours. Questions flooded investor boards. Journalists began circling. And through it all, Alexander never mentioned my name. But everyone knew. Because I was there at every meeting, every negotiation. The silent architect of their downfall. My ex called me the next morning. I didn't answer. He texted. I left it on read. He begged. I blocked him. His girlfriend went full meltdown on social media, accusing everyone, from me to Alexander to their own employees, of sabotage. All she did was prove what I'd known all along, she was noise. And I didn't deal in noise anymore. I dealt in legacy. The next time I saw Alexander, we didn't speak about my ex. We didn't need to. That chapter was closed. The revenge wasn't over yet, but the humiliation was in full bloom. And that, for now, was enough. He poured me another glass of whiskey and handed it over. To what comes next, he said. I clinked my glass to his. Because what came next, was mine. He tried to claw his way back. In the beginning, it was denial. Meetings rescheduled, calls ignored, PR statements issued. Then came the desperation. Frantic emails to investors, begging them to wait for the numbers. But the numbers were already bleeding. Leaks. Withdrawals. Quiet whispers that turned into full-blown headlines. And behind it all, the shadow of Alexander Voss's withdrawal hung like a guillotine. But I wasn't watching from the sidelines anymore. I was orchestrating. I had planted seeds of doubt through every channel I knew he depended on. Partners, consultants, even the image-obsessed influencer circles his girlfriend used to belong to. They used to post about their power couple vacations. Now, her name was trending for all the wrong reasons. Cheating rumors. Screaming matches in public. A recorded meltdown at a luxury spa that went viral in under an hour. She was crumbling. And he was finally realizing that the foundation he left me for had never been stable. Just glitter poured over rot. He called again. 21 missed calls. He left a voicemail I didn't even bother to finish. It started with I was wrong and ended with please. But apologies mean nothing when they're too late. Instead, I turned my attention to Alexander. Because he had started turning his toward me. It was subtle at first. A glance held too long. A silence stretched between sentences. The way he asked about my opinion even outside of business hours. I wasn't just a useful ally anymore. I was becoming necessary. He invited me to a private villa 2 hours outside the city, said it was for work. Strategy weekend. Just us, and a small team of high-level advisors. But I noticed how we were the only two staying overnight. I noticed how no one questioned it. We worked late into the night. Mapping projections. Running forecasts. I caught him watching me while I explained a plan he hadn't yet considered. He didn't interrupt. He listened. That was what made him different. He didn't need to dominate the room. He only needed to know who was worth hearing. And I had earned that. That evening, as we reviewed the last set of documents, he poured me wine instead of whiskey. You've done more in 3 months than most people do in 3 years, he said. I had a lot to prove. You've already proven it. He said it like a fact. Not a compliment. But I didn't thank him. I wasn't here for praise. Still, something settled between us. A quiet electricity. One I hadn't planned for. One I hadn't needed. But maybe, wanted. Later that night, he stood at the balcony while I sat inside, barefoot, reviewing a contract draft. He didn't turn when he spoke. I know what people say about me, he said. That you're ruthless? Unapproachable? Cold? He finally turned, just enough to meet my eyes. That I never let anyone in. And is it true? I asked, calm. It was. I didn't push. I didn't flirt. I didn't move toward him. I just sat there, composed. Letting the weight of what he didn't say hang in the air between us. Then he said the one thing I didn't expect, you see everything, don't you? I blinked. What do you mean? You saw through them. You saw through me. And you never once used it to grovel or gain favor. You just moved. I shrugged. I didn't want to be seen. I wanted to be respected. He nodded. You're both now. I didn't sleep that night. Not because of nerves, but because of clarity. I wasn't just rising anymore. I was shifting into something else. Something no one expected of the girl who once cried in a hallway, watching a man walk away with a counterfeit version of love. I was becoming someone with power, yes, but also someone who finally understood how dangerous stillness could be. Because people don't fear fire until it's under their feet. The following Monday, a new scandal hit. My ex's hidden investor? He turned out to be funneling money through shell companies linked to tax fraud. Anonymous tips, of course. Leaked documentation. Irrefutable evidence. It wasn't my hand that delivered the kill shot, but it was my voice that pointed Alexander's legal team in the right direction. Within hours, every company associated with my ex began pulling back. Clients disappeared. Partners froze contracts. Board members stepped down. And just like that, his empire crumbled. He showed up at my place. I should have expected it, but I didn't. I opened the door to find him standing there. Disheveled, eyes red, a tremble in his voice. Please. Just hear me out. I didn't flinch. You have 10 seconds. I lost everything, he said. And I know it's my fault. I should have never left you. I should have never believed her lies. I folded my arms. She didn't lie. She was always exactly what you wanted. Until it wasn't convenient anymore. He stepped forward. But you were real. You were mine. And there it was. The final nail. I looked him straight in the eyes and said, voice like steel, I was never yours. I just hadn't realized it yet. Then I closed the door. Not in anger. In finality. That same night, Alexander texted me. They offered me a controlling stake in the board you used to belong to. Want to co-sign it with me? It wasn't a question. It was an offer. One that said, you're not just invited in. You're wanted beside me. I stared at the message. And for the first time in a long time, I smiled. There's a moment after revenge where silence settles. Not peace, just quiet. Like the moment between thunder and lightning, where you're still waiting for the ground to shake. That's where I was now. Not broken. Not victorious. Just aware of the power I finally held, and what I could do with it. My ex had disappeared from the public eye. His girlfriend, now his ex as well, was eating herself alive on social media, posting erratic stories and cryptic captions that only made things worse. Their power-coupled brand was gone. Their investors, gone. Their followers, their friends, their staged photo shoots, all gone. And me? I was at the center of it all, with a seat beside the man who ruined them without ever raising his voice. Alexander had offered me more than partnership now. It wasn't romantic, at least not officially. It was strategic. Calculated. But there was an edge to it. An unspoken pull. We weren't pretending anymore. He invited me to stand beside him at the press conference announcing the acquisition of a major board seat, one my ex used to salivate over. I wore a fitted suit in charcoal gray, sleek and sharp, no frills, no colors, no distractions. I didn't smile. I didn't pose. I just stood next to Alexander as the cameras flashed and the headlines rewrote themselves in real time. Alexander Voss appoints rising executive as co-chair in surprise board takeover. They didn't even need to mention my ex. Because everyone already knew who lost. Later, at the after-party, the mood was celebratory. Glasses clinked. People whispered about how fast I'd risen, how close I'd become to the man who never let anyone close. I didn't respond to any of it. I had no interest in explaining what they could never understand. Alexander stood next to me, drink in hand. At one point, he leaned in and said, they don't know if they should admire you or fear you. Let them do both, I replied. He smiled at that. I think I already do. He didn't say it like a confession. He said it like a warning. It should have scared me. It didn't. Because I was done being afraid of power. I had spent too long letting other people weaponize theirs while I sat back and apologized for wanting more. Now I was more. The following week, a tabloid piece surfaced. Anonymous sources claiming my ex was emotionally manipulated and pressured by a toxic woman into betraying his longtime girlfriend. A last-ditch effort to salvage his reputation. It backfired. Because for the first time, people had seen the other side. The footage of me at the gala. The public records of my promotions. The way Alexander, cold, sharp, untouchable Alexander, kept choosing me, without ever saying a word. People weren't buying the poor little victim narrative anymore. Still, I knew he wouldn't give up that easily. Cowards rarely do. And sure enough, he showed up one last time. This time, it wasn't at my home. It was at a conference where I was scheduled to speak, my first major public appearance as co-chair. I was backstage, calm, rehearsing in my head. He approached like a ghost. Uninvited. Unannounced. "You win," he said. "Is that what you want to hear?" I turned slowly. "You're still under the impression this was about you." He looked older now. Less polished. Like he'd been running in circles chasing a version of his life that no longer existed. "She ruined everything," he muttered, meaning the girl he once left me for. "No," I said. "You did. You picked her. You defended her. You betrayed me. And now you want me to feel sorry for you because you finally realized she was a mirror reflecting your own worst instincts?" He stepped back. Like the truth physically hurt. "You've changed," he said again, but this time it wasn't angry, it was almost pleading. "No," I corrected. "I just stopped lying to myself." He opened his mouth again, but I raised a hand. "You don't get to rewrite this story. Not here. Not now. You made your choices. And I made mine." I walked past him, out onto the stage, where the lights were bright and the room fell silent. I delivered my speech without a single tremor. I spoke about leadership, innovation, resilience. I spoke about the future. Not once did I mention the past. I didn't have to. It was already buried. Afterward, Alexander joined me on stage. He didn't touch me. Didn't smile. Just stood beside me the way a king does when he finds someone worthy of the throne next to his. Someone who didn't beg for it. Someone who built it. And when we walked off stage, hand in hand for the first time, not for cameras, not for power, but for something real, I knew exactly what came next. Not just the final blow. The legacy. In the end, I didn't need to watch him fall. Because he already had. There was no grand confrontation. No dramatic press conference where I exposed him. No courtroom gasps or tabloid exclusives. Just silence. The kind that follows a storm once it's destroyed everything in its path. He was gone from the circles he used to dominate. Blacklisted. Forgotten. A cautionary tale whispered behind closed doors by people too afraid to admit they once tried to be just like him. And I was exactly where I was meant to be. Alexander and I had built something more than revenge. We built momentum. Power. A partnership that others didn't dare question. We weren't lovers in the traditional sense, there were no messy declarations, no candlelit promises whispered into the dark. Just looks that lingered too long and choices that always included the other. He didn't try to define it. Neither did I. Because what we had didn't need labels. It had weight. He called it a merger. I called it liberation. In the months that followed, I expanded. Launched an initiative under our name. Spearheaded a platform that funded female-led startups, ones just like the ideas I'd once timidly mentioned to my ex, only to be dismissed. Now, I signed off on investments bigger than his entire former company. Women came to me in whispers at events. In bold emails. In quiet corners of boardrooms. Telling me their stories. Telling me they saw themselves in mine. I never gave speeches about what had happened. But I didn't have to. They already knew. I didn't need to justify the rise. I was the rise. Then, one day, months later, I got the final piece of closure I didn't even know I wanted. A letter. No envelope. Just folded parchment in a plain box, no return address. I opened it with steady hands. I already knew who it was from. He apologized. Again. But this time, not for me. For himself. He wrote about regret, about fear. About how he thought power came from being admired, when really, it came from being trusted. He wrote that he never understood the value of what he had. Until he saw someone else hold it and never let it go. I read it once. Then I set it on fire. Not because I was angry, but because I had no use for ghosts. The only man I allowed into my life now was the one who never once asked me to dim my light to make him shine brighter. Alexander wasn't soft. He wasn't romantic. But he saw me. Really saw me. One evening, months after our final acquisition together, we stood on the rooftop of the tower that now bore both our names. The skyline blinked beneath us. I was dressed in black again, my armor of choice. He was quiet, as always. Then he turned and asked, "If this is where it all ends, are you satisfied?" I looked at him, then out at the city, where my past lay buried and my future rose like steel and glass. "No," I said. "Because it's not ending." He nodded once. "Good." He handed me a glass of whiskey. The same drink we started with. And we toasted to nothing. Because we didn't need a reason anymore. We were the reason. And as I stood there, stronger, sharper, colder, and infinitely more alive, I realized something: they broke me once. But when I came back, I didn't just rise. I replaced them. I didn't want revenge. I became it. And this time, I wasn't the girl he left behind. I was the woman he'd spend the rest of his life trying to forget. And failing.